Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and I am so excited for today's episode because we are talking about a type of entrepreneurship that is all about imagining something, building it from scratch, and then bringing it into the world. All new technology, really cool innovation at play before our very eyes. And we're doing it with an incredible entrepreneur that, since I'm from Boston, I think I can safely say this guy is wicked smart. When you look at his career, when you look at the things that he's building and putting into the world today, it's incredible to see what he's up to. So let me tell you all about today's guest. His name is Raymond King. Raymond has a PhD in mechanical engineering and robotics from the University of Utah. He worked as a researcher and leader for over 7 years at Meta's research and development branch when it comes to augmented and virtual reality input devices, focusing on sensor systems. That's a spoiler alert. You're going to hear what he's doing with that these days for their input gloves and wristbands. After leaving Meta, he started his own company called Applied Sensor Company and has been working on developing and improving smart textile sensors for everyday applications. If you're thinking to yourself, holy cow, what is this technology that Raymond is bringing to the world? What does it do? How is he building his business? We're all in for a real treat as we hear the behind the scenes of his story and all the things that he's up to. So I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Raymond King. All right, Raymond, I am so very excited to have you here on air with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Heck yes. Now, I've given you that Boston certification as wicked smart, so you've got to live up to it today, and we'll start with your background. Take us beyond the bio. Who's Raymond? How'd you start doing all these cool things?
Yeah. No, I was thinking for a while of different ways to discuss this, and I think, actually, I was hoping I could flip your script on you just a little bit, and because I've been watching a bunch of the podcasts, and I know we often ask at the end, like, what's that piece of advice you want to give other entrepreneurs? And there's a theme that I think maybe we can use for most of this talk that I want to start with to get into kind of my background. And that, if that's okay, I want to ask you that, Brian. Like, can I flip you on the script and start with the advice first?
Raymond, you can do whatever you want, because I will say it's fun giving a little behind the scenes for listeners. You and I have exchanged so many fun emails at this point that You're part of the family. So lay it on to us, man.
Yeah. No. Okay. Cool. I want to make sure. And so the piece of advice that I want to give to people who are currently at my level, which is, early entrepreneur, recently entrepreneur to entrepreneur kind of thing, right? Is I didn't realize how much of entrepreneurship was a journey inside kind of yourself, to think about like who you are. And a lot of that, so you asked like, what's my background? Like, where did I come from kind of thing? And I would say I've learned more about myself like in the last 2 years of being an entrepreneur than I have about myself in the last like 10. And so I will actually get into my actual background, as part of this now, but like, that's, I feel like, a theme that hopefully we can kind of riff off for the rest of the time here, that, a lot of this stuff that happens to you as an entrepreneur is also just thinking about like, what do you want? And a lot of that comes from where you came from. So my background, I will make it as short as possible. So I was super interested in cars and motorcycles, helped build. I was a mechanical person for a really long time, thought I was going to be a mechanic when I was younger, ended up getting into personal training and fitness really hard when I was in my like early 20s and teens. Tried to combine those two things together and actually did biomechanics as an undergrad, and then got into the idea of making prosthetics because I was like, oh, I love human bodies and I love making mechanical stuff. So I was going to do prosthetics, and that's why I ended up doing a PhD in robotics and biomechanics. And then from there, I somehow got the luckiest combination of things in the world. I was able to combine my third thing that I really love so much, which is actually like video games. And playing games. So I was able to join Meta as you mentioned, like working on these VR and so virtual reality, augmented reality input systems. And I get to work on the VR gloves, and it's public. So you can go and look up like Meta VR gloves. And I was super excited about working on them, loved working there for the 8 years that I was there. And, then got laid off A lot of your guests, I listen to a lot of the podcasts to try to get an idea of, and a lot of your guests, have a similar story, unfortunately, over the last several years that they got laid off. And will side tangent to anybody who's ever been laid off before right there. And this will go into that journey and of why I'm on this entrepreneur trip now is like being laid off from a job you like really love, like a dream job, is kind of like being dumped by a significant other and with like an email at like 5 a.m. and there's nothing you can do about it. And there is, and they just and all your friends have to hang out with them now and not you. And so you get this invisible barrier between like you and all the people you spent, your relationships with for the past X amount of time you've been in the company. So that though, for me it was a really big turning point for like, do I really want to go back to corporate world when something like this could happen? And I'll pause here because otherwise I will talk constantly for the whole time. But one thing that that constantly came back to me was like, if that can happen, what are my alternatives to? And I would never have thought to be an entrepreneur like 5 years ago. If you would ask me like, Raymond, would you ever become an entrepreneur? My answer would flat out be like, absolutely not. Sounds super hard. I would not do that. Never. And here I am. And a lot of that is that journey inside.
Yeah, Raymond, I love that overview and honestly that twist that you're putting onto it, because you're right, it's going to frame so much of our conversation here today. And what I really hear is it's kind of this age-old misconception that, having a job is safe. I remember when I graduated from college, I'm the son of an immigrant mom. And so an immigrant mindset is typically, we come to the United States so that our kids can have a safe job and a 401k and all these other things that we've been sold as part of the professional career journey. And it's interesting, so many amazing entrepreneurs like you've so correctly called out and observed is that they found out it wasn't safe. You did get laid off and your future was in the hands of somebody else, whether it be an HR department or a business leader who just decided, hey, we need to have some cuts. And so with that in mind, I love how much you emphasize the journey of inner growth, because when we become entrepreneurs, I totally agree with you. I actually think that the more interesting side of entrepreneurship to me is that inner battle, because business is simple. Let's face it, Raymond, you've got an incredible product and you've brought it into the world and you're going to find the people who want to buy that from you. And then there's just going to be this exchange of money. But what's way more difficult is every single day you wake up and you say, am I the right person to do this? Is anyone going to believe me? Am I good at sales? Like there's so many inner things. So Raymond, I'm just going to piggyback off that. And I guess I'm going to pick on you a little bit here today and say, talk to us about some of those inner thoughts, because that's the real stuff that you're working through. And I know all of our listeners are going to resonate with so much of it. And the last thing I'll interject is I don't think we talk about these things enough in the world of entrepreneurship, but it is the real stuff. So Raymond, take us there.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I was, I think so. We'll probably at some point get into what I'm up to now, but like there are obviously when I first started, I would say I was an entrepreneur. Like for the first year I was laid off, because it's been about 2 years since I got laid off. And so that first year I would say I was, reading books, trying to figure out like, do I really even want this? Right. Isn't it safer, as you just mentioned, right, to just get another job again kind of thing? But I kept coming back to this idea that like it hurt real bad. It still hurts to get laid off. And I said, lose that connection with all the people that you've helped and grown over that time kind of thing. And I still stay in touch with a lot of them. So it's not completely, not a complete cutoff, but it's a big deal. But that journey of like, do I really want this? Yeah. Can I do it? And then actually more recently, several months ago, because we'll get into it, but right now I'm making mats, and that wasn't my initial plan or idea. So I make smart mats, and I think to myself, right, like at some point, like, what if the only thing I'm ever known for is making smart mats? Like, am I okay with being the king of mats? Like, as like somewhat facetious, like off the cuff, but there are some just the weird questions you have to ask yourself and be kind of, you don't even have to be okay with it. You just have to like let the thought come and go to some capacity. And because it's very hard to know what's going to happen next, right? So, because as any entrepreneur, hopefully, right, like you pivot to what you need to do to survive business-wise too, right? You said in some capacity, like if somebody wants to buy something from you and then a lot of that wants to be sold, then like you start moving towards that thing that is, so you can survive as a business. So that almost seems more straightforward than really asking your question, do I want this? Do I want to work on that? Do I want... Yeah, it's a very interesting journey of... I'll think of the right way to say it in a few seconds, but you've come back, Brian. You say something.
Yeah, I want to go here with you. It's such an astute observation that you have internally, and I'm so grateful for you sharing it here transparently on air together, is that what I'm also hearing as part of this is part identity. I guess I could use the phrase part identity crisis, because I've gone through that as well, Raymond. When I hear you say, do I want to be the smart mat guy? Like, is that really what you want? It becomes our identity. And it's because we pour so much into it. And I don't think the outside world fully understands how deep entrepreneurship goes, and the fact that even when you're not working, Raymond, you're thinking about all of these things. And it sounds to me, and I'd love to hear some of your insights about it, it sounds like you've already well established internally that, hey, I'm shifting my identity, and some things you're taking on as part of your identity when they're actually not. And it's part of our entrepreneurial growth journey is also to remove ourselves from that. But yeah, there's so many of these fun things kicking about in your mind.
Yeah, it is. It's. I wish I could. You said it very well, and I will not stumble through a retort of that. So, but it's a journey, and let's say a lot more internally than I thought it was going to be. Take me where you want to go next, Brian. There's so many ways I could.
I know exactly where I want to go, Raymond, because you are so talented, and just having gone through your website and seeing your manufacturing process and what you're putting into the world, to me, what really amazes me is that you clearly have so many skills, and you've picked those up along the way in your career. And also, it sounds like in your hobbies, you're just a passionate person who loves growing and loves building. And I love that side of your entrepreneurial story. At the same time, it's really fascinating for me to hear on the air today together that, I didn't want to go into smart mats. That's not what I pictured. Where along the way for you do you navigate those waters and those thoughts of, there's so many things I could do? Like, Raymond, you could probably build things that the rest of us can only imagine or see in a science fiction movie. But at the same time, you have to channel all of those possibilities into a thing. And right now it's smart mats, but of course there's going to be other things in the future. How do you navigate those thought threads?
Yeah, so thank you, Brian. That you had a guest on recently. I think her name was Kelly, maybe Kelly Dugan, that was talking about the fact that like these winding roads of like your path, in hindsight look like they make a lot of sense, but during the time, they don't. Maybe they don't feel like they all come together at some yet. And yeah, so when I was at Meta, I got exposed to so many different types of making things. And I'm still interested in the human body and prosthetics and wearables and stuff like that. And when actually the reason I got into what is smart textiles for me, I specifically work in an area that's called technical embroidery. I sometimes cringe when I say the word embroidery, because usually a lot of times people immediately think to themselves, wait, like you think the thing that my grandma does, like, with like adding like butterflies and like kittens to like handkerchiefs? And the answer is yes. But typically we use like conductive threads instead of regular threads, and conductive, materials or plastics or something like that, things that can get combined together. And all this is super interesting to me because I'd worked on wearables for so long, putting a hard thing on the body is like, this is not going to work. Like, you're just not, there's so many things that make you want to take off something that's hard or heavy on your body, unless it gives you an incredible benefit, right? Like hard hats, yeah, 100%, right? Like body armor is heavy, but if it stops a bullet, I survive, right? Like there are things that you are willing to put on your body, but like convincing somebody to wear something because it gives them some piece of information about themselves, like, heart rate or respiratory or, how they're moving or whether or not they're walking with a limp or something like that. Like in some of those cases, it's hard to convince people to even wear something that could benefit them if they if the benefit is, not immediate, like I said, stopping a bullet or stopping a hammer from landing on your head. And I was always intrigued by all these these soft sensors that we could make, because I was like, oh, the application space for this is intense, in the sense of, right, like, how many textiles are you interacting with right this second, Brian? Like, let alone how many you've encountered with today, right? Like, probably on the order of, close to 100. The carpet, your socks, your shirt, your bed, your curtains, right? Like, if you could put sensors in any of these places to give you some piece of information about your environment, maybe your house could get a little bit smarter, or maybe you would realize that, my heart rate's been elevated all day today for some strange reason, right? But you didn't actively think about putting it on. It's just there, and you don't even notice it because it feels as comfortable. And like, these are the things that drove me to start a company. And of course, I had worked on wearables for a long time, and know how hard it is. And I'm a bootstrapped, as we talked briefly before we started, right? Like, I'm a garage entrepreneur kind of thing, and and bootstrap, meaning that, like, I fund myself at the moment, and I don't have the runway to make wearables, like, because people change their shape and size, and there are so many different ways that people can be different to put things on their body, that you do have to get to your point, right? Like, how do you narrow down? And the fact is, I wanted to stay in the space. I wanted to learn so much more about how to make soft sensors, because I'd love to put them on people. But that's really complicated and hard and takes lots of time and a big team. And I have none of those. So I have limited time, and I want to stay in the space. And so you do kind of start working through this process of, like, well, what would benefit from being flexible and durable and easily manufacturable and be able to be made in large areas, kind of thing. These are the benefits of making things out of embroidery or textiles. And the floor, it turns out everybody's got to be on the floor. Who would have known? So, right, you're on the floor always. Everybody's on the floor, and your pets are on the floor. Your packages, if they're not on a table, are on the floor, kind of thing. And so the idea of, like, okay, like, maybe there is a value in a sensor here that is just collecting information about what's on the floor. And but that's good to be durable, and it's good to be movable or flexible, right? Because floors aren't always hard. You can't have hardwoods everywhere, or tile everywhere. That's uncomfortable. So how do you have a flexible flooring that can give you all that type of information? And so that paring down of, like, I want to keep doing this tech, right? But, like, I know I can't do wearables right now because it's just out of the scope, right? Knowing your limitations I'll throw that in as another entrepreneurial tip, right? Like, there is, at some point, like, be realistic with your limitations. Like, I know how long it would take me to make those wearables, so, like, it's just not in the cards right now. Not unless I went and got a lot of external funding. So, but paring down to, like, what could I make now that would increase my depth of understanding, while also bringing some value, some benefit to people out there, right? Because for some reason they want to know that they're in their bed at night, or they want to know that their cat is in their cat corner, and be able to look on their phone and be like, yeah, Muffin is in the corner. I know because, my sensor it says that she's there, kind of thing, right? There's so many different ways to use the floor and get some piece of information out of it that I was like, that's a big space, even when pared down to, like I wanted to do so much, and I'm so interested in doing so much with it, but paring down to, like, what's sellable, because you got to survive. At the end of the day, we're entrepreneurs because we want to be a business. We want to sell things. We want to improve the life of other people with the things that we make and benefit them somehow. And that process, though, in hindsight, makes a lot of sense. But obviously, when you're doing it, it makes so many other ideas are fighting for you. So to go back to the first part of that conversation of, like, even when I got all the way to this part of, like, I think I'm going to make flooring and mats, like, and then only after, like, deciding that was the thing I was going to do, then you had to do that internal journey of, like, do I want to be the mat guy? Like, that's the it's all connected, and in hindsight it all kind of makes a little bit of sense, but it is it's a ride.
Yeah, it is a ride, Raymond. I want to go here with you live on the air. It's very fun. For me, I just feel like you and I are chatting today, and this is one of those rare episodes where I kind of forget that we're recording, because it gets me so excited hearing the way that you think, because I do think you and I think so differently. You have, and I so respect and admire the way that you think, because in many ways, it's what I don't have. And so hearing you talk about this tech side of the world, and hearing you talk about just truly just inventing something out of thin air, like, I'm truly blown away by your abilities and the things. And when you talk about a smart mat, where my head goes is to the zillions of business ideas and the ways that I would license it and partner with other companies and industries. Because one such example, and this is why I'm saying it feels like we're doing this in real time instead of on a recording together, is in my head, I'm thinking, well, Raymond, let's get those sensors in a mat. We'll put it in a yoga mat. We'll sell it to yoga studios because it can be instructional. Is that, if you're doing a pose, and I don't know why I'm going to yoga, because I don't do yoga. So I'm running myself into a dead end path with regards to the depth of this example, but I would imagine that we could partner with a yoga company to develop an app that says, okay, if you're trying to learn this pose, you've got way too much pressure on your right hand. You've got to move some of that weight into your legs or something like that. Where in your mind does this go? Because Raymond, just knowing you're a few years into your entrepreneurial journey, are you thinking longer term? Are you thinking external industries? Are you right now very much in tech refinement stage? Where's your mind go with regards to all the business side of things as well?
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely, so I was going to make a comment to you at some point, right? That like I went through the several podcasts. I've been enjoying a lot of of your content. It's really very insightful. Like your ability to segue, by the way, is incredible. I once watched you go from like a discussion about like generalized AI to like personal goals without not dropping a beat. So like your what you do it's also very impressive, by the way. So, but oh man, I've lost my train of thought.
Well, I appreciate the compliment being the thing that derailed your train of thought, because it hits me in the feels, Raymond. But yes, talking about the business side of things.
Yeah. So a lot of the guests that you have on, I've yet to find that many that are hardware, right? A lot of them are like coaching or finance or, some sort of business level or scaling up or things like this, right? And I've had a lot of good talks, I think, actually in the last month of like using external, scaling outside of the US kind of thing, which is super cool and interesting to think about, especially for any of us who are trying to grow our business. So, but the business itself, the reason I bring up as a hardware person, right? Like I do love the tech and I love talking about the tech, but I do have to sell something in order to pay the mortgage and feed myself. The family likes money in order to have some level of not living in a box. So it's always being open, right? And this is, of all the lots of great guests that you've had on, right? Talking about like being willing to pivot when a good idea comes by, right? Like, yeah, like maybe the yoga thing is the greatest idea, but there's a link here, right, too, which is having the right connection into the yoga world in that particular case, right? That like I think it would make most sense to partner with somebody who was, a super well-known yoga instructor and actually develop it with them. So that way it solves the problems that they see with, beginner yogas. People who start yoga and then stop because they don't get enough instruction or they have bad local teachers or something like that, but instead could do, something online with a bigger, get that feedback from a really excellent, top-notch yoga instructor. So it's that keeping an open mind to what problems are out there that you can solve with a technology like this, because it can go a lot of places, and it is a little overwhelming to think about, like, right, which one do I want to go after? And there's the only other piece of advice. I kind of like the yoga one in the sense that, because like I am a fitness person, I don't do yoga either, but I applying it to places that deeply resonate with me personally is also part of that funnel for myself, right? So if somebody said, I don't know, there's so many things I am interested in, to be completely honest. So if somebody was like, what about like conveyor belts in a manufacturing plant or something like that. But like, that's not very interesting to me. But I'd be like, oh, but is it interesting? Like, what could you figure out if you knew, how much pressure, and for whatever reason need to be soft instead of hard, because they do have rubberized pressure like sensors kind of thing. So I know I'm taking a long pause here to get to your point, which is thinking about that business part is obviously critical to make the money, to be a business. But it's also just part of the process of finding and having the right thing find you. Actually, a small tangent myself off. I love tangents, right? That like one of my mentors right now is always saying to me, like, you might not know what your company does right now, but survive, right? Like, do what you can to survive, because his point is, right, if you disappear, and you might have been a month or 3 weeks away from somebody being finally internalizing, finally seeing you 10 times for whatever reason, whatever you've been putting out there, finally hearing about you from somebody else and going, yeah, I have this problem. And it's been a while. It's been on my radar to reach out to you, but I just haven't yet because I'm so busy all the time. Right. And the longer you can survive and stay alive, the more likely that people have the opportunity to find you and then reach out to you with cool opportunities like the yoga mat or, my ridiculous one about the conveyor belts. Yes.
Raymond, it's fun because I think you just exposed two things that you and I very much have in common. One of which is that we for sure love tangents, and the second of which is that we're easily excitable. And that's one thing that I hear so much in your personal entrepreneurial journey is that I think it's a huge asset and a huge positive trait in our growth journeys because, as you know, I mean, you've heard in so many of my other episodes, is that it's guaranteed that none of our paths are going to be linear. You and I aren't married to any one thing because we're so easily excitable on 50 other things. And I think that that's such an important trait for all of us to embrace on our entrepreneurial journeys. I want to ask you this, though, because hearing you talk about the business, this is me totally putting you on the spot. This is not going to be an easy question to navigate. So I'm sure we're only going to get your raw thoughts because you didn't know this was coming. But that is, when I look at people with your skill set, Raymond, what I really admire about what you're doing is that you're building a business, and the contrast I'm going to paint there is not just a product. Because I've met so many people in your case, Raymond, that because they've always worked in a corporate career, because they've always worked within departments and on specific projects, they can see themselves launching a product into the world, but they fail to back that with a business. And I would argue that a business can go much further because it can have resources, it can have operations, it can have scalability. There's so much more that we can amass along the way. Just look at Meta, for example. And even if we just stick to their hardware department, there's an entire organization and business that backs their ability to launch these things into the world. Where along the way did your mind think about a product versus a business?
Ooh, man, Brian, that's a good one. I think because, my short answer is because it didn't start as a product, I would say, right? Like the idea was, and it's funny because if you read, anybody who reads enough entrepreneur books will know that, find a problem, fall in love with the problem, and then find whatever solution there is to that problem. And that's totally right. That makes total sense, kind of thing. And I did the thing that you're less supposed to do most of the time, which is I fell in love with a technology and thought about so many different ways it could be applied to, and especially with my long-term dreams of maybe getting back to that wearables kind of thing, and just becoming an expert in this space to make wearables with this type of technology. I didn't come in with that, as you said, that product mindset of it has to be this thing. I've come up with this really great idea, and I'm going to push it out to the people. You had I think you had your cousin-in-law, I think Rudy, and you and him were talking about the fact that he had made a design for some pants because he's a designer. I can't remember the name of his clothing brand. You'll have to plug him. But he had made some pants that he thought sucked. He was like, "This is such a bad design," and everybody loved them. And he was like, "Well, shit. I guess I got to make more of that design." That he was like, "I would never have done that." So really but he's a businessman, and he knew that that's what people wanted. Kind of thing, right? So he changed his opinion on it. He said, "Fine, I don't like this, but everybody else does," right? So being able to to not fall in love necessarily with like a specific, like I'm working on this product. I'm, quite happy with the product as it goes. But right, like I said, if somebody turned around and said, well, can it do this? Could you make it do this? And I asked, like, well, what's the opportunity there? And, how much would it help, a business, a person? I get, and that's for better or worse in some capacities, that's the benefit, or not, of being an entrepreneur. You get to make those choices instead of that, as you said, if you're part of a corporate system, right, those choices have already been made for you, right? Like, you don't have to think about those things because like somebody up above you has said like, do these things or whatever, like we're pretty sure it's going to work, and you just go off your checklist kind of thing a lot of times, and you do your best. Like, I'm not trying to demean and belittle like the hard work that goes into all those steps to actually create a product, but you often don't necessarily need to argue up like you shouldn't make this, like this is a bad idea for these reasons, like customers are going to hate it, right? And being able to connect and stay connected with your customers, I think of the two other things, right, that I see a lot, not only in your podcast but in other places, right, is like make your customers happy and work hard. And like that's a lot. There's a lot in the working hard part, but like that persistence, that desire, that unbridled optimisticness, you have to be as an entrepreneur to just like wake up and keep going every day down the path that is because you part of that journey inwards, right, is being like, do I want to do that product anymore? And it's not great to switch products all the time or anything like that, but you have to ask yourself that question as well. And that's on top of like, are people going to like it? Do they want it? Is it helping them? Is it something I want to be a part of? It's like, there's all these things that are all combined together. And, that is just something I would never have realized was such a big part of being an entrepreneur kind of thing.
Yeah, very well said, Raymond. And yes, shout out to my cousin-in-law, Rudy, who is the mastermind behind the shorts brand Chimu. I love the fact that you plug that, Raymond. It's incredible recall. And I think that, again, I'm going to call this out. I didn't think I'd call this out here live on the air with you. It's the first time that I'm actually saying this about an entrepreneurial trait because it's so prevalent in the way that you operate, Raymond. And I think it's underrated or not spoken about often enough. And that is, you take inspiration, you find ideas, you find lessons in every single thing that you do. Kind of one of the cliches that I say all the time is everything is a microcosm of life. And I feel that way about business as well. Everything is a microcosm of business. I become a better entrepreneur and businessman and leader in person every time I learn about tennis or about chess or about anything. And that's what I so appreciate about the way your mind works, Raymond, is that whether it's one of our podcast episodes, whether it's a book you've read, whether it's one of your many hobbies, you find inspiration and insights from that cross those boundaries that a lot of people want to pretend everything is separate and everything lives in individualized, compartmentalized boxes. But you find those things and let it cross into every other area of life and business. So huge kudos to you. It also means that I love the way that your mind works, and I have no idea how you're going to answer my last question, because you might think you're going to be off the hook for this last question because you hijacked it for the front of our conversation. But Raymond, you love entrepreneurship as well, and that's something that I so appreciate about you. And you know that our audience right now is entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs all over the world, over 150 countries, and all different stages of their own business growth. You've given them a lot of food for thought. Seeing the world through your lens and your business and the work that you're doing, they probably are looking inward and saying, holy cow, I've got a lot of questions to ask myself and a lot of things to think about. So guide them through that, Raymond. What's your best piece of advice that you want to impart on them today?
Yeah, as you were saying, I was not prepared for this question at all, Brian, but that's fine, because while you were talking, I knew the answer. And it was actually part of the way you said, as we were teeing up that question, you said, me and you love entrepreneurship. And I didn't when I started, right? And like, that's an interesting thing to think about and say that, like, I learned to love entrepreneurship, and I learned that, that I kind of learned to enjoy the struggle. And I didn't like it when I started, right? Like I said, like when earlier in the conversation that 5 years ago, you had asked me, do you want to be an entrepreneur? My flat out answer would have been absolutely not. It sounds too hard, difficult, so many hats, so difficult. And there's so much I don't know that I'd have to know to get to that point. And right, I did I didn't love entrepreneurship. So if you don't, and you're an entrepreneur or you're an early entrepreneur and you're like, I don't think I love this, don't stop just yet. Like, keep learning about it, keep trying, try to learn more about your customers. I think sometimes it's hard because you get focused. It's good to ask those questions inward and ask, like, what do I want out of this? And like, what is this, do I want to be an entrepreneur? But once you start connecting with the people who buy your service or your good or whatever it is, and you start to see, even if it's bad feedback, this didn't work for me because it didn't solve problem B or A or whatever. And you're like, well, I could change that. I could make sure it solved that problem for you. And that gives me a lot of energy and really kind of doubles down for me to start to learn how to love entrepreneurship, because it's terrifying. It's scary. As I said, I've learned more about myself personally, about what I want and what I don't want over the last 2 years and the last 10. And that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't allowed myself to kind of embrace a lot of the struggles and learn to love entrepreneurship. Because I don't think it's innate. Yes. It wasn't for me.
Raymond, I'll tell you what, man, I knew that you had this power, but you have an incredible ability to articulate things and share so transparently. It just seems to me, I don't know how to perfectly articulate this, but you have that ability to recognize your own thoughts and let them into the world with minimal loss of translation along the way. And I think that that's an incredible ability, Raymond. And I'm so grateful for the advice that you've imparted on our listeners. I will also tell you a little bit of a geeky thing about me is that I'm excited to queue you up for sharing your link with our audience, because I'm pretty sure, I can say this with 99.99% certainty, that you are the first and only guest that's about to drop a link that is comprised of a 3-letter domain name, which is a very prized possession in the world, Raymond. So for listeners who want to see all the great things that you're doing with your company, Applied Sensor Co., and not only the smart mats that you're working on, but so much more goodness to come from you in the future, Raymond, drop those links on us. Where should listeners go from here?
Yeah, the most relevant link, as you say, is asc.com, which historically it turns out to be one within the first 50 domains ever attached to the internet. So I've heard. And so asc.com. And, you can find me on LinkedIn as well. I think it's Raymond J. King. I do technically, there's a TikTok I technically have for a couple of ideas for mats while I was doing my Kickstarter. I'm not going to drop that link. You can search for that, luckily, if you look for Applied Sensor Co. and Sun Capacity on LinkedIn and YouTube, because I wish I could create content at the rate that you do, Brian. It's intense because I'm all the hats, and sometimes the developing tech right now for me is definitely on the high end, and then it is right now creating daily content. So LinkedIn, Raymond J. King, and ASC.com. Go check me out those two places.
Listeners, you already know the drill. We're making it as easy as possible for you to find those links down below in the show notes, including we are for sure going to unearth Raymond's TikTok. So you can find that down below, because now that Raymond and I formally know each other, I'm going to be pushing him in the future to be creating more content. So it's going to be super fun, but his business website is at asc.com. Super simple. It stands for Applied Sensor Co. asc.com. We're also linking to his personal LinkedIn down below in the show notes. Otherwise, Raymond, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
It's been awesome. Thank you so much, Brian.